At this point, everyone's heard of Nigeria, but I'm betting not everyone really knows what it's about. I mean, sure, maybe you've heard of Lagos, the other city that never sleeps. Or Nollywood, the film industry that somehow pumps out more movies than Hollywood. Maybe you've even seen the flag, or maybe the only thing you know is that it's somewhere in Africa. And it's huge. Whatever it is, that's fine. Because one thing about Nigeria, the more you dig, the more you realise you've been missing out on one of the most extraordinary stories ever told. So, let's travel back in time. 9000 BCE, the Stone Age. While most of the world is still figuring out fire, people are already settled in what is now southwestern Nigeria, near a place called Iwo-Heleru. Then, around 500 BCE, something appeared up on the Joses Plateau. Figurines, terracotta. Of course, they didn't just appear out of thin air. They belonged to a culture we now call the Nok. But that was just the beginning. By the time we hit the 9th century CE, Nigeria wasn't only one thing, it was many things. Look at this. In the north, the Kanem-Borno Empire had risen around Lake Chad, stretching across deserts and trading with Egypt. In the middle, the Hausa city-states, like Kachno, Katsina, Zaria, were building massive walled cities and running markets that would make a modern mall look quiet. And in the south, the Yoruba kingdom of Ife was producing bronze sculptures so realistic that when Europeans first saw them centuries later, they literally refused to believe Africans made them. They thought they'd found the lost city of Atlantis. And don't even get me started on the kingdom of Benin. Keep in mind, I'm not talking about another African country here. So, the kingdom of Benin. Their royal palace was covered in thousands of bronze panels so detailed you can read them like a metal history book. That was what it was like in Nigeria for a time. They were self-sufficient. They were connected. They didn't need the world to notice them, because they were doing just fine. But then the Portuguese arrived in the 15th century. At first it was just trade, though it didn't really end the same way, because for the next 400 years Nigerian people were among the millions forcibly shipped across the Atlantic. Entire communities were gutted. And remember those powerful kingdoms we just talked about? They became targets. Amidst that chaos, something was brewing in the north. See, in 1804, a Muslim scholar named Usman Dan Fodio launched a jihad. Technically, a jihad is translated as a holy war, but to him it was more of a religious and political revolution. And out of that initiative came the Sokoto Caliphate, one of the largest empires in 19th century Africa. It became so big that it not only reshaped the north politically, but it also pushed Islam from the ruling class into everyday life, permanently changing who Nigerians were. All the while the British were watching from the sidelines. Well, that's putting it lightly. They were more like circling the country like hawks. First Lagos in 1851, then a protectorate here, a company there. By 1914 it was official. A journalist named Flora Shaw gave the land its name, Nigeria, from the Niger River. And on January 1st, 1914, the north and south were stitched together into one colony. Mind you, this didn't happen because the people inside asked for it. It happened because the British found it administratively convenient. Translation: the south was making money, the north was costing money, so they smashed them together to balance the books. That went on for decades. Then October 1st, 1960 arrived. Independence was finally here. Cue the fireworks, raise the green and white flag. It was a massive moment for sure, but the tensions the British had ignored, or rather stoked, came roaring to the surface. By 1967, a full-scale civil war broke out. The eastern region declared itself the Republic of Biafra. 3 years of brutal fighting. Somewhere between 1 and 3 million people dead, most from starvation. Sure, Nigeria survived, but the scars never really went away. What followed was decades of military coups, rigged elections, and oil booms that went bust. But through every tyrant and every crisis, the people kept pushing back. Whether that's through protests, through journalism, and through that famous Nigerian stubbornness. It wasn't until civilian rule finally returned in 1999 that things started to take a turn for the better. But yeah, that's the foundation of it all. That's where Nigeria comes from. Now let's take a look at what's inside. But first, I want you to take a deep breath. Because after everything we just went through, you might be thinking, okay, so Nigeria's had a rough ride. And you wouldn't be wrong. But don't you ever wonder just why? Like, What were they even fighting over? Turns out it's this. Nigeria sits right at the crossroads of West and Central Africa, covering around 923,000 square kilometres, or about 356,000 square miles. And it's not just one landscape, and it's literally like someone took 4 completely different countries and stacked them on top of each other. So let's dissect it layer by layer, starting from the bottom. Here you've got the coast, including mangrove swamps, lagoons, creeks, the works. And this is where Lagos sits. It's a megacity of roughly 18 to 21 million people built on a lagoon. Yet somehow, it's become the busiest port in all of West Africa. Above that, you've got rolling hills, thick tropical rainforests, and then the savannah. Keep going north and you'll hit the Joseph Plateau. It sits between 600 and 1,800 metres, or 2,000 to 6,000 feet above sea level, with these ancient eroded rock formations that look like a sci-fi movie set. Just keep going north, and at one point, you'll notice that things are starting to get drier, then arid. That's the Sahel, aka the doorstep of the Sahara. I know it's a lot, but we haven't even talked about the most important feature yet. I mentioned it earlier, and if you were paying attention, you'd know I'm talking about a specific river. Well, there's 2 actually. You've got the Niger and the Benue coming together in the middle of the country, like a giant Y. Then the Niger flows south and fans out into one of the largest river delta networks on Earth, the Niger Delta. And underneath that delta, oil. Lots of it. But we'll circle back to that in a bit. For now, we're still admiring the view. Do you know what the highest point in the country is? It's a mountain called Chahpal Wadi, up in the eastern highlands near Cameroon. It stands at 2,419 metres. That's about 7,936 feet. Then there's the Kar-Inji Reservoir, the largest body of water entirely within Nigeria's borders. And finally, up in the northeast, there's Lake Chad. This lake is legendary because it's shared with 3 other countries. But sadly, it's been shrinking for decades, losing 90% of its water since the 60s. So I say we book a trip to Nigeria ASAP before it's gone. I've linked some solid flight and hotel deals in the description if you want to see it for yourself. But before that, let's continue our journey, because somewhere in the middle of all this chaos sits Abuja, the purpose-built federal capital. It was planted right in the centre of the country in the 90s, like a referee standing between the north and the south. Given everything we know, it's safe to say Nigeria is a diverse place. And that diversity, it explains everything that's coming up next. Because believe it or not, Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa, crossing over $2 trillion in GDP by purchasing power. And get this, in 2026, it's officially growing faster than the US, the UK, and Germany. The IMF is projecting growth to hit 4.1% this year and climb to 4.3% in 2027. For a country that's spent decades fighting oil dependency and military coups, that is a massive flex. On top of that, President Tinubu is 3 years into what is arguably the most aggressive economic overhaul in a generation. Fuel subsidies, gone. The currency, devalued and stabilised. The debt to GDP ratio, it's finally trending down. Obviously, with so much positive action, the World Bank noticed. The IMF noticed too. But here's the thing about Nigeria's economy. It's complicated. Inflation finally dropped to around 16% recently, which sounds great, especially after realising that it was at 33% just a year ago. And because of the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, global fuel prices have spiked again, which is pushing that number right back up. Because in Nigeria, it's a domino effect. Higher fuel costs means higher transport costs. Higher transport costs means higher food prices. And you know what happens next. When food prices jump in a country where over half the population is still struggling to meet basic needs, that becomes a survival crisis. Then there's the oil. Nigeria is Africa's largest petroleum producer and 12th in the world. But much like everything else, it's got its pros and cons. See, roughly 80% of their export revenue is still tied to crude, meaning when oil prices spike, the government wins. When they crash, the whole country feels its impact. Good thing they have other industries to rely on. Specifically, agriculture. Nigeria is the world's largest producer of yams and cassava, and it ranks 6th globally for overall farm output. They technically have the resources to be the breadbasket of the continent. So the potential? Enormous. The challenges? Very real. But how do 242 million people navigate that kind of roller coaster every single day? Well, that's where their unique DNA comes in. Let's talk about the culture. Picture this. There are 242 million people, 250 ethnic groups, and 500 languages in Nigeria. Usually that's a recipe for a country tearing itself apart at the seams. But in Nigeria, that's just the raw material. So if you ask a local how it all works, your chat usually goes like this. Wait, you speak how many languages? 500. And you all get along? Who said anything about getting along? We're just busy building. And that is the soul of this place. You see it first in Nollywood. It's the second largest film industry on the entire planet. Not Bollywood, okay? Nollywood. Don't get it mixed up, because Nollywood pumps out thousands of movies a year. It's gritty, it's fast, and it's everywhere. From a high-end tablet in London to a simple projector set up in a Lagos alleyway. Then there's the sound. I'm talking about Afrobeats. Sure, you could call it music, but it's more like a global takeover. Just play a random track, and you'll hear Yoruba rhythms mixed with Igbo storytelling, and that specific, high-voltage Lagos energy. When you see Burna Boy or Wizkid selling out stadiums in Paris or New York, or Rima topping charts in 2026, you have to realise these guys aren't just pop stars. They are storytellers of the highest degree. But okay, let's look past the glitz for a second, because I want to take you to Kano, where you'll see a Hausa craftsman leaning over a dye pit that's been running since 1498. 1498? For real? Yes, for real. Imagine, Columbus was still lost at sea when these pits were bubbling with indigo. And they're still here, using the exact same techniques passed down through generations. It's not just the craftsmen following traditions either. You've got the Igbo community, still operating on the ancient principle of Ohanaezai. That's the idea that decisions belong to everyone, not just one person at the top. That's why Nigerians are world famous for their never say never spirit. It's written into the DNA. It was forged when they built kingdoms from scratch, tempered when they survived colonization, and hardened when they rebuilt after a civil war. If you think about it, everything boils down to their ability to keep going, to keep pushing through. And there's actually a word for it, tenacity. That's what their culture is about. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Which aspect of your life requires the most tenacity right now? Think about it for a minute, and once you've got your answer, you know what to do. Drop your stories in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.